Hi, I'm Jeff. Today's topic is destroying the fog of war, which probably confused you at least enough to entice you to attend. So thank you for that. Uh, my About Me slide is, well, once it appears, pretty darn short. If I've earned your time by the end, then maybe we can talk more. I have a bit of a pet peeve of long About Me slides. Anyway, quick definitions, no huge surprises here, right? Attacker, penetration tester, red teamer. We're not getting into pen testing versus red teaming, like sparkling penetration testing versus real red teaming. Not today's topic, all right? Attackers want your data. That's pretty much what it boils down to for most breaches nowadays. Attackers want access to your data. And if they can get your data directly, then they will. And sometimes, if it's a so-called like one-step breach, there's not much you can do on the defender side. If the attack is wget, if the attack is curl, if the attack is a friggin' web browser going to an OpenS3 bucket, or as long as you exist in a state where you can press F12 and look at the source code and there's some social security numbers, there's not much you can do as a defender if attackers can get your data in one step. And there's lots of other examples beyond S3 buckets out there. Move it, other managed file transfers. Those are some juicy servers. So if they're accessible directly in one step, that's a bad place to be. So I like to keep things simple. Like MITRE ATT&CK is amazing for having common terminology for things, but a lot of people look at MITRE ATT&CK for enterprise and get scared, right? There's so much going on with these attacks. How am I ever going to get started? I try to keep things simple. Most organizations have their critical data on the inside. Therefore, attackers need internal access to get to that data. Most of your users don't have access to all of that critical data, so attackers often need privileges. But for the record, if the goal data is accessible remotely, then it's a one-step breach, and you're just in a bad place as a defender. All right, so speaking of getting in, I hat tip to Tim Malcolm-Vetter. He has a great old blog post on there's only 5 ways in. For a non-employee to gain internal initial access, there's like 5 fundamental real methods. We have phishing, real exploitation of public-facing services, we have logging on, we have rogue devices, and supply chain attacks, right? And there's a heck of a lot more attack surface once you're inside as well. It's a very different game as a penetration tester, internal versus external attacks, all right? The nice thing about exploiting public-facing stuff is it scales really, really, really damn well, all right? I'll have a joke about this later, but as the new exploit.py du jour comes out, initial access brokers, or the people who sell shells to them more properly, essentially do mass scan, pipe to nmap, pipe to exploit.py, and sell all the shells for $100 to $300 to $500 each, and walk away. Right? And it scales to the IPv4 internet pretty darn well. Move it managed file transfer. This is what happens. Your proxy not log on, proxy not shell, not proxy not shell log on from Exchange. Same idea, right? Some of them are lightly authenticated, but unauthenticated remote code execution, Cisco iOS web. Right now, that scales really darn well, right? There's like 100,000 plus boxes compromised in the last like 3 days, Cisco iOS. Yeah, that's bad, all right? Now, phishing and logging on are targeted, lightly targeted, but last year I tried for all of the demos last year. I did a live phishing call, right? You have to have the phone number in order to make the call. In order to send a phishing email, you have to choose a destination email address. It doesn't have to be like super targeted, but it is targeted, all right? As opposed to mass scan 0.0.0.0/0, which takes about 18 hours on DigitalOcean. Scanning the IPv4 internet is not a big deal anymore. Rogue devices, look, Katie Nichols did a great talk last year with Adam Mashinchi on penetration testers versus and red teamers versus proper villains, as Katie likes to say. And I kind of hate pen testerisms. And unfortunately, rogue devices like showing up on site and plugging in my malicious attacker laptop, you mostly see that from pen testers and red teamers that just show up unauthenticated and have internal network access, and they tell you what they find after a week or so in a very uncomfortable conference room. Like, that's the stereotypical pen test. And if you don't work in hospitality or higher education, pour one out for those, it's pretty unusual to have physical attackers showing up on site, right? In terms of prevalence of breaches, which is, hey, as a pen tester, as a red teamer, that's what I'm supposed to do, emulate real-world, realistic threats. Yeah, that's what I'm supposed to do. So I try not to do too much of that one. Then we have supply chain attacks. Supply chain attacks are hard to manage as an organization, but often it comes down to try to minimize your vendors, try to minimize the people with access to your environment. In terms of highest risk, vendors that you allow VPN access or have their own machines with like TeamViewer installed. I'm looking at you, HVAC vendors. I'm looking at you, OT environments. That is about the highest risk, as opposed to, yeah, we have some third-party software, and if that were compromised and we automatically updated, yeah, but you probably have bigger worries. All right, we'll talk about some of those bigger worries first. All right. Here's where it gets into like the thesis statement of my life so far, all right? Defenders' objectives. To prevent successful breaches, defenders need to both detect and respond to attackers who get inside your environment before they accomplish their goal. So we have at the bottom here a quick visualization. If your time as a defender to detect and respond to the attacker is less time than it takes them to win, good job, you've successfully stopped the breach. Otherwise, you're really sad, right? Here we have a long lap for the defender. You can imagine, I've talked to plenty of SOC analysts recently, and let's be honest, at Friday at 5 p.m., your top-tier security operations center goes home, hands off the reins to outsourced, we'll email you later, and Monday morning you might find out about some exciting things that happened over the weekend, all right? You can imagine a shift change. You can imagine a miscommunication. You can imagine, I accidentally marked that as it's okay, one alert that, yeah, missed detective control, and you accidentally had a little delay there, all right? So, continuing the thesis statement, you have 3 main jobs as a defender. First job, reduce the number of ways attackers get inside to begin with. The analogy here that I'm using just for this one slide is whack-a-mole, right? If the attacker pops up on one system and they are there long enough, they win. So it sure would be nice to play whack-a-mole less often. And as an industry, we tend to focus on, theoretically, this, all right? All of our preventive controls, we build higher and higher castle walls, and then we ignore those castle walls and don't bother looking for anybody trying to go over them, tunneling under them, or blasting their way through them, all right? As an industry, this is what we tend to focus on, all right? It is useful, and I have some specific pointers here, like, what do you use for remote support? What don't you use for remote support? Do you use Screen Connect internally? No? Should you maybe have an alert for a new Screen Connect install or an outbound connection to Screen Connect remote servers? How about one of my favorite examples? I see a few open laptops. Press start, followed by QUICK, you see Quick Assist, the built-in Microsoft provided signed binary that phones home over HTTPS to something.microsoft.com. If I'm going to stereotype for a moment, I'd say that that is the least suspicious binary out there, or the type, right? Microsoft signed, built-in, outbound HTTPS to Microsoft.com. However, if somebody provides you 6 characters and you type it in, they now have remote access to your machine. Do you use Quick Assist internally? If not, why is it still enabled? Defaults don't save you, right? Close one whack-a-mole hole, disable quick assist if you don't use it. It's my very favorite go-to method for vishing, social engineering over the phone for the sake of code execution, right? I hate jargon. Nobody needs to say thrunting. All right, check, I said it. All right, external attack surface, all right? Minimize that. Just be aware of what public chunks of code. There's Exchange out there, and I'm a sysadmin at heart, but I cannot justify having Exchange exposed to the outside world at this point. It's just too much attack surface. Other special shout-outs, VPN concentrators, managed file transfer services, all right? It's so many lines of code. I think Swift on Security had this recently. Essentially, code is your attack surface. The more accessible lines of code there are, the more flaws that will be found over time, right? IIS web server with hundreds of thousands of lines of ASPX, there will be flaws. Minimize those number of flaws and be aware of what remains, right? Now, when it comes to phishing over email, social engineering for code execution over email, oftentimes people jump to, let's blame the user. You click the link, you open the attachment. Here's where I push back. Look, I'm not against social engineering exercises, phishing tests that lower your response rate, increase the reporting rate of emails over time. I'm all for that. But the next step is not blame the user for the things that they opened, all right? We design our physical buildings as well, and we want to control who's inside and outside. But you know what's a feature of every corporate office I've ever seen? Doors. We still allow people inside, and you employ employees who are helpful and want to help others. Rephrasing. It's not a problem that can be solved that some users will try to be helpful when they're sufficiently tricked. That's a design constraint. It will happen that your users want to be helpful. They will be tricked. In other words, how about, why is it not on you? Why is it not on IT? Why is it not on InfoSec that your users can run code they get from the public internet? That's something you can solve. Well, you don't understand, Jeff. There are like 12 people in our finance department that need to run Office macros. I get it. Production requirements trump all other things. However, that's 12. What about the rest of your organization? Well, Jeff, we couldn't partially deploy because that would just be a partial defense. I will happily accept an 80 or 90% reduction in risk for Office macros by disabling it for anyone who's never run them before. And if you see attempted macro execution, you can call that user and say, hey, what's going on? Do we need to add you to the allowed to run Office macros? And maybe we have a conversation about where you got those macros, etc. All right? And there's more than Office macros, but Office macros are a face that just wants to be punched. So I'll do the obligatory. All right. Next up. You need to lower the time to detect and respond to attackers. Speaking bluntly right now, this is where we fail as an industry. You can't respond to attackers that you don't know are there. So yes, periodic thrunting, but also quick detective controls for what attackers are likely to do in their first moments inside your environment, all right? So make it take less time, make it a shorter lap for you to detect and start the incident response process. So we have more on this coming up later, but train your response capabilities. I love looking through public breach reports. And one of the ones that comes to mind offhand was the, is it HIS Healthcare of Ireland has a nice public breach report. What's the acronym? HSE breach. So if you look up HSE breach executive summary, there's a great one there because the executive summary had the timeline. It was at least 45 days, maybe 2 months from initial access to taking down all of HSE, like healthcare for the country of Ireland, right? That's bad. But there were at least 2, maybe 3 times in that 45 to 60-day window that the defenders detected the attack and responded and kicked out the adversary from that one machine. If the attacker is still inside your environment after your remediation, you have just informed the attacker that you are aware of them. You have revealed information to the attacker. You've disrupted, you maybe even destroyed the fog of war. See what I did there? Yeah. For the attacker, because fog of war works both ways. If I'm the attacker, I land on my first endpoint. Does anybody remember your first day at a new job? You had credentials, you could log in, but you had no idea how the company works. You have no idea what file shares there are, what different departments there are, what's the user naming scheme, what's the computer naming scheme, where's the interesting stuff, where's the stuff I need for my job. That's attackers too. They jump in, they have their first endpoint, but they need to go through a process of discovery, and they don't get a 1 or 2 week onboarding process to work with. So test your response capabilities. This is a larger journey, and I'll talk about journeys and steps later on as well. All right? All right, here's one of my favorite odd analogies for the right audience. I'm hoping I'm in front of the right audience right now. Has anybody played Mario Kart with friends? Show of hands, right? This is the right audience, apparently, right? Even split screen in the same physical room. You ever walked into a room, came back from the restroom, just went to grab some food, and your so-called friends started a game of Mario Kart without you? You know that sinking feeling in your stomach in that moment that, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, I need to run up and grab my controller, I need to play the game, right? It's my favorite analogy. I had to install an emulator to get this working properly, right? This is every scenario for you as a defender. The attackers always get a head start once they've gotten code execution. Always. You can minimize that, but I love how he gets hit partway through. You can minimize that time frame by having some detective control alerting as soon as possible. Maybe it's you being hit by a green shell. Maybe it's seeing people zoom past you. And I'll mention this later, but organizations have exactly one detective control by default. If somebody breaks production, you'll find out. Like, depending on the adversary, but it's easy to talk about ransomware right now due to prevalence, you will always eventually detect ransomware organizations inside your environment. Always, right? We have seen the industry trends of detection timeline go down over time, right? Well, does it count as you detecting the attacker if they leave a ransom note on every domain joined machine? Because that's kind of important, right? Yes, for the sake of those statistics, that also counts. So the good news is detection timelines have been going down over time, and a significant portion of that is due to the ransomware operators getting tired of waiting for you to notice. So they change the desktop wallpaper of every domain joined machine, right? Your goal is to detect the attacker sometime before they inform you of their presence. Pick up the damn controller because you can't finish the game until you pick up the damn controller. You need detective controls, right? So you need to increase the time it takes for an attacker to accomplish their goal as well, right? Objectives 2 and 3 are arguably interchangeable, but I emphasize detecting attackers because that's where we fail as an industry. We focus on 1 and 3, let them get inside less often, and resolve our pen test findings. But how many pen testers in the room? Red teamers in the room? How often are defenders blissfully unaware of the pen test essentially the entire time of the pen test? All right? 100% of the time. I love that Black Hills Information Security, shout out for them, has a design goal of every penetration test to be caught. Because if you successfully do a stealthy attack, you know one set of attacks that doesn't get caught inside that environment. What does it take to be noticed? All right? A new domain admin account, in all seriousness, in many environments, that will not trip any alarms. All right? Outbound Cobalt Strike, broadly speaking, as an industry, we very much rely on endpoint controls, your AV, your EDR, your Sysmon, your CrowdStrike, your etc., and we ignore raw network traffic. So if I'm operating from a device that doesn't have your AV EDR of choice installed, or I'm using something for C2 that does not trigger your AV EDR, like Quick Assist, would you trigger on that right now? I love using SSH as my C2. SSH has a lot of capabilities. Great for admins, great for defenders, and great for attackers too. All right? So you need to buy some time, because at some point, if the attacker can win in 45 seconds, you don't have much of a chance to pick up the controller and finish your lap and kick them out. Rephrasing, if an attacker can get in easily and gain access to data quickly, it doesn't matter what your detection capabilities are. If you're playing whack-a-mole that often and they can win so quickly, you will lose. You need to buy yourself some time. This is what a well-defended environment should look like from the attacker's perspective, right? They know there's some goal over there in the distance. There is some server they want to access. Maybe it's the stereotypical domain admin, so they can just deploy ransomware domain-wide. But oftentimes, more targeted attackers want specific data. But if your environment is well instrumented with detective control, see all the cameras, there's a lot of fog of war. Hey, I did it again, the analogy. And there's a lot of defenders throughout the environment. There's a lot of false leads through the maze of figuring out where they need to go. The odds of that attacker in the lower left making it to the goal somewhere in the distance without being on camera, without bumping into a defender, is not good, right? That's what a well-instrumented environment is supposed to look like. Going back to the analogy of doors on buildings, all of our well-instrumented environments with doors on the buildings, somebody that's not authorized could get inside. And if they're allowed to wander forever throughout your corporate headquarters, eventually they'd find access to some data that is non-public. It's a foregone conclusion, right? But hopefully, if somebody who doesn't belong there stumbles around enough, you notice them inside your environment. Detection and response capabilities. So it's time to do a little bit of demonstration. You, sir, in the second row right here in front of me, can I borrow your black hat for a moment? So it's time to go a little bit dark for a bit here. All right. So I was looking around last night, and on the Deadwood Visitor Services business directory, there's a lot of local organizations around. Thank you. There's a lot of local organizations in Deadwood. I'd like to keep examples relevant. So I want to do something a little bit IT-ish, so scrolling up and down, we see, like, I live in Southern Oregon, Rogue Valley. It's a bit of a stereotype that essentially every company name starts off with Rogue Valley. My company name is Rogue Valley Information Security. In the local area, your two choices for prefixes are Deadwood or, further up, Black Hills, right? Hello, Black Hills Information Security. All right, a generic information security company from this area. That's my name too, all right? Well, I was browsing to some of these websites and I saw Deadwood Digital Dynamics. That's an interesting looking site. So if you browse to their website, it looks like they're an MSP. So let's keep things relevant. Let's continue on a little further. Turns out that if you search for Deadwood Digital Dynamics on Shodan, one of the first results, one of the only results really, is remote.deadwooddigitaldynamics.com. And Shodan is quite helpful. All right? We see that what port is open, what service is open? RDP. And Shodan is so kind, it even takes a screenshot for you if possible for RDP. So let's use the leet hacksaw technique of scrolling down. Who should I be targeting next? Sorry, Sam. Sam Bridger Sam at deadwooddigitaldynamics.com. So certainly I have the DNS name to work with, Deadwood Digital Dynamics. And certainly I have now a username to work with as well. So this is where it comes into single-factor authentication, backed by Active Directory or local authentication that allows for remote execution. This is a good place to start off with. Oh, one moment, let me zoom in. Zoom, enhance. There we go. So here, I mean, the most fancy I'm going to be during this demo, grep. All right, slightly more fancy, it's rip grep. Search for, I'm going to start off with, just as an example, gmail.com from this file. COMB, combination of many breaches. It's a 42 gig text file, and the format is email address, password. As an example, I'll give Gmail. There's a lot of Gmail out there. All right, I'll let this scroll on, and look, I have a couple other tabs available, and that is real data, by the way. That's why it's scrolling by real fast, so I don't have to feel as bad about it. But what else should I search for? How about I search for anything at deadwooddigitaldynamics.com? All right? Now, it's a 42 gig file. This will take like a minute and a half to run. So I can press enter, but I also have the next tab where I've already pre-canned that search and save it as extracted DDD for deadwooddigitaldynamics.com. Let's play a word matching game. Which of these email addresses is familiar? One of these things is not like the others. One of these things is familiar to Shodan. Sam? Sam? Oh, yeah, Sam. Oh, man, I love Sam. He's great. So, look, obviously, I've taken a peek before. Like, we've all been at Deadwood. It's a little late in the evening. So I have, as a reminder, remote.deadwood. Here, let me use another leet hacksaw technique. Copy, MSTSC, paste. So, Sam Bridger. And what was that password again? Oh yeah, copy, paste. Oh, this is a good start. Did I forget to do a thing? All right, fine. You get to see a little early that I'm a cheating, dirty liar, and I'm not criming on stage. We're logged on to a totally remote machine that's not a local VM. I forgot to add it to remote desktop users group. So now we are Sam. Ah, sweet. I'm logged in remotely. This is great. So often I might need some local privilege escalation. I might need something, right? So one of the first things many, many attackers do, look, fundamentally attackers don't have to shell out to existing binaries. But it's ludicrously common that in the first 10 minutes of an attacker getting actual hands-on keyboard to a shell, they're running shell commands. So what should I do first? Oh, lapel mics, I wish I had you. How about net user? What users are local? We got Sam, we got Vagrant, we got Administrator. We don't have a whole lot going on here. Well, let's see, what am I up against? VER. All right, this is Windows 10-ish or WinVer. Pops up a little GUI, and it's Windows Server 2019. Sweet. What else should I run? Maybe what domain is it connected to? SET. And I see user domain is the same as computer name. Therefore, this is local authentication. Or it's a domain controller, but usually you know if it's a domain controller by that point. All right? What else can I do at this point? Another elite hacksaw technique? It's a shortcut. Windows and the E for Explorer. Because under this PC, we have C drive, but what else is there? Documentation sounds lovely. I would like some documentation. I would like to document all the things. This sounds great for everyone. And remember, they're an MSP. So what folder sounds really, really interesting right now? Clients? Clients sounds great. Let's look at clients. What folder sounds interesting next? Client passwords? That sounds great. That sounds lovely. Client passwords, oh man, you know they're a bad MSP because they can't spring for proper Office, and we have LibreOffice on this box. And yet, I'm going to press Enter. This is the trickiest part of the demo. Wait for LibreOffice to open. But it felt more real than a CSV. Read-only is fine. And what do we have as we open up? This sounds like, really, we started off with logging on, but now we have other places we can log on. So in terms of the 5 ways in, what is column A now susceptible to? What? Supply chain attacks, right? MSPs are a great example of the risk of supply chain attacks, right? Because now I can log into any of these. And some of these are real local companies, for the record. Please don't log in there. I don't have the authority to grant you permission, etc. But what should we do next, all right? Control A, Control C is a elite hacksaw move, but stereotypically attackers, they love staging to some directory, maybe even 7-zip from the command line with a password, but that sounds hard. What if I just browse to some file upload site, file.io, and there are many of these that require no authentication whatsoever, and now is honestly the trickiest part of the entire demonstration, requiring internet access. Yup. I'm not going to say it happened last year on this stage by me, but I seem to not learn my lesson because the Wi-Fi that's accessible over there is not accessible over here. Do I still have file.io open somewhere? I do not. Well then, I can upload. I swear I can upload. File.io is unauthenticated. Drag and drop a folder. They even have an upload folder button. Client password sounds like a great thing to upload, right? It even gives you a QR code at the end. I'll be honest, I was really looking forward to seeing people whip out their phones to download the exfiltrated data, right? So let's call this, at this point, we have access to this machine. Oh, and for the record, going back to local users on this machine, can anybody guess a password to another local account that might be a member of the administrators group? Anybody done some automation before for a Windows install? What's that? Vagrant. What's the password for the username Vagrant? Vagrant. So, you know, as a redemption victory lap, CMD, run as administrator. Vagrant. Sometimes privilege escalation is hard. Sometimes it's not, right? If you forget the password, have you tried copy pasting the username? It's not a bad place to start off with. Sometimes it's more difficult, but not always. All right? All right. I gave the visualization of a well-defended environment before, but honestly, this is more common. You land on your first endpoint, and the fog of war is not all that bad. You look ahead of you, you see maybe a file share, a mapped drive letter, internal SharePoint, internal Teams, internal Slack communications, you exfil. All right, just to be clear, for the record, I got yelled at from Wild West Hackin Fest last year. Jeff, were you criming live on stage? I was not criming live on stage. It's local. So for the record, right, Dolly is pretty impressive by ChatGPT. Make some fake website screenshots, please. Even make some fake data, fake passwords for companies local to Deadwood. It worked out pretty well for fake data, right? And that's a fine use case. It just has to be convincing enough for humans, which, to be fair, is exactly how large language models are designed. The least surprising next word given a prefix, essentially. So one of my favorite things to point out early on in a pen test, password guessing is huge. I have a whole separate presentation on credential stuffing, so I won't belabor that point too much, other than to say password guessing requires only 3 things: a single username or a list of usernames, a single password or a list of passwords, and something to authenticate against. I will bet that the large majority of companies represented here today, and for those joining us online, represented in the cloud, have single-factor authentication backed by Active Directory exposed to the public internet. Somewhere. Unless you've audited for specifically that from your entire web presence, it's really easy to accidentally expose single-factor authentication backed by ID exposed to the public internet. Really, really damn easy. RDP is a whole explanation, but like, hey, what username should I work with? Well, it's probably some variation of employee names. Therefore, some variation of human names. There's only so many human names. If I guess a valid username with an invalid password enough times, what is the constant concern? What's the constant concern? Account lockout, absolutely. But if I guess an invalid username with an invalid password, what's the concern? Nothing, nothing at all. Like 3 wasted CPU cycles, and they're not my cycles, so who cares? So there's not really much of a downside for aiming wide with your list of usernames. I'm a huge fan of statistically likely usernames, for example. All right? Statistically likely usernames takes the names registered with US Census data, so slightly US-centric, and combines them in all of the formats. Are you first name dot last name, first initial last name, etc.? There's only so many permutations. If you want to find out for sure which one's in use, I mean, Power Meta by the great Bo Bullock is great at provide domain name, Google and Bing search for files at that domain, and look for the embedded username in PDFs, Word documents, Office, etc., and see what the username format is. For most penetration tests, I can find the username format pretty darn easily. Though for the record, I can waste 3 CPU cycles and guess invalid usernames just fine too. But it's nice to know authoritatively. All right? So, as a reminder, there are plenty of real-world breaches that involved 0 exploitable flaws. Lots of them, even the majority. That said, I do rule out a special exception for initial access brokers. I said it before, mass scan, pipe to nmap, pipe to exploit.py, swap out exploit.py for Cisco iOS, and now I have an internal vantage point inside that environment. I can sell that shell off or maybe run it in-house, but ransomware operators are more and more specialized. They buy their first shell, they buy the ransomware that somebody else maintains and make sure it's not flagged by AV, EDR, at least not in time. So they convert a $300 shell into a $50,000 ransom once per week per ransomware operator. Not a bad business other than the whole criming thing. I took off the black hat. Do good. All right? And to quote John Strand at Way West Hackin Fest, the one and done San Diego run, out of the last 100 penetration tests that Black Hills Information Security has done, John Strand sees every outgoing report and said that 2 out of 100 required exploitation as part of accomplishing the goal. The good news is percentage is really easy to calculate when it's out of 100. 2%. So the very large majority of successful breaches require 0 exploitation. For the record, if I could go from stereotypical domain user to domain admin without exploitation and with exploitation, both 2 paths, that didn't require exploitation. They exploit far more than 2% of breaches. It's just that it wasn't required for them to accomplish the goal. Make sense? All right, here's a very fancy Venn diagram. On the outside, we have the most inclusive circle, all software. And first of all, CVEs are not issued for all software. In fact, not even all vulnerabilities get a CVE assigned. And in fact, Microsoft doesn't even use the term CVE the same as everybody else. To everybody else in the world, the CVE means the flaw. To Microsoft, CVE is the patch for the thing. It's Microsoft, just Microsoft things. I digress, all right? So a subset of software is software with known CVEs. And for 2023, we're up to 30-some thousand CVEs issued thus far. There's a really awesome Google spreadsheet put out by Google Project Zero. It is tracking all of the CVEs. There are 31, not counting the header, known CVEs to be exploited in the wild in the year 2023. Didn't I say there was 30-some thousand CVEs issued? So, for the record, this Venn diagram is not to scale. Because maybe 1 out of 1,000 CVEs will ever be exploited ever. Don't get me wrong, I want organizations to patch, but as an attacker, I am concerned about exceedingly few missing patches that allow for code execution. Pretty much, if it's unauthenticated to code execution, I'm interested. Or if it's domain user to domain admin in one step, special shout out for MS14068. But other than that, I usually don't care all that much. So I talked about this. For detective controls, I love reading through prior breach data and looking through the most recent DFIR reports. They stage real environments, or as real as they can make them. They instrument the hell out of them, and they wait for attackers. Or maybe they run the payload themselves. Attacker gets a new beacon phoning home. They say, oh, sweet. I don't know how this run, but let's go ahead and get some ransom. And they report on what happens afterwards. And we see that they ran system info, ipconfig, and net very often. We also see bits admin used to get Cobalt Strike. And they use Screen Connect for their initial C2. It is exceedingly common that the first C2 is not what we think of as a real C2. Work with me here. C2 stands for what? Command and control. It's how we command and control machines. Where did it say it had to have virus total results to count as C2? SSH is great C2. RDP, the ransomware deployment protocol, is fantastic for internal C2. Screen Connect, I can make a strong argument that TeamViewer is the world's most popular C2. It's extremely common that the first C2 is just something to get initial access, that they get the real attacker C2 from there. Maybe after disabling endpoint controls. Step 1, Screen Connect. Step 2, disable Defender or friggin' Symantec, all right? Step 3, do the evil, all right? Let's look on. What's next? Next most recent DFIR report. We see Q user, net, NL test, task list, all right? Continuing on, we see run DLL32, net group, net view, NL test again. Look, and some of these you use internally, but I can't help but, I don't always like memes and presentations, but if there's some combination of useful and amusing and or dank, then they should be included. So why is it when something happens, is it always one of you three is the first things that attackers run? NL test is my favorite go-to example. Admins in the room, have you ever run NL test before in your life? Show of hands. You're not an admin. Sit down, Matt. There are 3 out of a lot of people in the room. So this is not universally true, but it's a really good example of built-in commands that attackers tend to run when their first hands are on a keyboard that could be a fantastic detective control for something bad is happening here. And if you're one of those 3 admins in the room, then you probably, when you get that alert, can say, hey, everyone, It me. Don't worry. What does NLTest do? Tells you what Active Directory domain you're connected to, what domain controllers are in that forest, etc. I had a tweet about this just a moment ago. You know what attackers need to do that users don't? Find out who they are. Who am I? Is who am I intrinsically malicious? No. My favorite detective controls are not, this is known bad, Cobalt Strike, default binary. My favorite signatures by far are, this is unusual and worthy of further investigation. Because those signatures are flexible. No matter what it is, beaconing activity, you're going to learn something. Maybe it's something that's beaconed inside your environment that is legit, and now you've learned more about your environment, or maybe it's friggin' Matt with Cobalt Strike because he got lazy and set his callback interval to 5 seconds. Or maybe interactive. Every day, all right? So I like Venn diagrams. This one's slightly fancier. It's hard to read in the upper left. We have commands you run internally exclusively. And on the right side, we have commands attackers run exclusively. And we have some spillover in the middle. This exact diagram will vary on your company, but I think it's directionally accurate for a lot of companies. You probably all run PowerShell and CMD. You've run net before. You've run IP config before. Maybe attackers sometimes run ping, but honestly, they don't care if ICMP is open. They care if methods of code execution are open. So PSExec and remote desktop are things they care about far more commonly. So build this diagram for your own organization. Also, second note, if you don't know what binaries are being run inside your organization, that's your next step. Because otherwise, you don't have much opportunity for catching attackers before they alert you as to their presence. If you are relying upon periodic thrunting to find the attackers, you're not going to be periodic enough if they can win quickly enough, right? I also especially like, notice on the right side here, we have net1.exe. It's my favorite example of trade-offs as an attacker. In some environments, net.exe is monitored for its use. Net local group administrators, I ran that, remember? Right? Net users, maybe that's monitored. But it's long rationale, something Y2K. There's a copy of net called net1.exe. Have anyone here ever before in your life ever explicitly called net1.exe not named Matt Toussaint? Hi, Derek. Yeah. So let the record show there were 2, and both of them are attackers. That's the point. Sometimes the attacker's method of evading detective controls itself can trigger the detective control. The attempt to evade detective controls is itself an observable event. All events are observable, but you only have limited human attention. But anybody explicitly calling net1.exe is an easy win. Similar. What do we use for making copies of domain controllers ntds.dit files? NTDS util. Now, if you're catching it this late in the exercise, you're probably going to have a bad time. But that's one of the few things that should set off blazing klaxons inside of your environment. I just have a few slides left. We're doing okay. All right. So canary tokens. Canary tokens are a wonderful place to start. They're free and they require nothing else other than ability to load a registry key and a friggin' email address. They don't require SIM. They don't require periodic thrunting. They require you to be able to receive emails. That's it. If someone runs nltest.exe, anywhere you run this, somewhere that this reg key has been added, it sends you an alert immediately. If you got 5 alerts within a 5-second window about nltest and who am I and set and system info and vir, sounds like you need to engage your incident response process. It's an easy win. It is my favorite second detective control for all organizations, because you'll always find out if somebody breaks production. This is the best second detective control. All right. And look, I set off plenty of detective controls, alerts, but if nobody monitors the log, it doesn't really matter. So one way to phrase this might be, if attackers can get in easily, get their initial access, and get access to your data quickly, it doesn't matter what your detection and response capabilities are. You can't play whack-a-mole fast enough. Some point, somebody's going to get the evening shift of the Security Operations Center. At some point, I'm going to land on a box that doesn't have your AV, EDR, etc. All right? Rephrasing. Edgy take. If an attacker can both get in and win in an hour, you're just boned. So, how do you slow down attackers? I have a whole other talk on that. I don't have time for it right now, but bit.ly/top attacks, and I have a link for it at the end as well. All right? So as a reminder, we have two races, attacker versus defender. Once they get inside, you need to detect them and kick them out. There are no 100% preventive controls. No matter what every vendor would like to tell you, there is no shiny blinking box that will find all of the attackers. Though special shout outs, as I mentioned beaconing, special shout out to Active Countermeasures, AC Hunter, Rita. Looking for beaconing activity, regardless of the application, is a fantastic detective control as well. It just takes time to rule out those false positives. All right. People sometimes look and say, look, you're talking about really advanced stuff. And I go back to probably my favorite author, Brandon Sanderson. Took like several books to come up with this whole quote. He just alluded to it for a couple books. But the most important step you can ever take in your life, the next one. Look, that journey, that secure Mecca so far away. Good point. Can you move one step closer? When you get back to work, can you add a detective control on one machine, NL test on one machine, your own lab environment, your own machine? Maybe it goes to not generic alerts at your company. Maybe it goes to you at first. Hey, look, this works. Hey, look, rest of IT. Can we roll this out to a couple IT folk? Can we roll this out to a few friends of IT? Can you take the next step? It's okay if it's a small step. Just keep walking. All right. So first steps, canary tokens. Deploy more of them. Group policy does great with registry entries. And if something doesn't work, if it starts setting off those alarms, if you're one of the 3 admins that runs NL test, then remove that detective control from that machine. But keep taking forward steps. It's okay to roll back something that had problems as long as it doesn't disrupt production and you can roll back and keep walking. I have a whole other presentation on finding attackers as well. And slow down attackers. What should you do next? Look through your own mapped drive letters. There are plenty of threat actors that's one of their first things. Look through drive letters, right? Mapped drive, like the Uber breach. VPN in, browse to file share, grab password manager. That's like 2 small steps away from what I demoed today. It was multi-factor VPN, and they just spammed the user until they clicked accept. Otherwise, it's the same, all right? Lapsus Group is rather famous for, or the rebranded Lapsus Group, is rather famous for their posts about breach data is within 1 hour of their first shell. The 1 hour timeline I gave before is not entirely arbitrary. You need to buy yourself some time. But seriously, good news. Coming up at 1 o'clock, Dave Kennedy has 6 things you can do to better defend yourself right friggin' now. And it's Dave, so it's also the first time in a while I've presented before Dave, so it's nice. Really sucks to follow up Dave Kennedy on stage. Anyway, and also shout out for Jake Williams. Today, right after Dave, is cybersecurity for the have-nots. The first step is often the most difficult, and it really sucks when step 1 is install the most expensive software you can find. All right? What was the company that bought Splunk recently? And the joke is they accidentally just misunderstood the bills. They thought they were renewing Splunk, but they accidentally bought the company instead. All right. Couple of minutes for questions. I have 4 minutes till the top of the hour, and I'm already a slight jerk. But here's the QR code. It's also bit.ly/killfog. All of my presentations always, the last slide is the shortcut to this exact presentation, bit.ly/something. And here are the shout outs for all of the other talks I've done, many at Wild West Hackin Fest. Oh, and shout out to Leslie Carhart, opening keynote saying, hey, we need to do better bringing other people in. Look, there are more qualified people. but I'm not early in my career at this point, and I want to help more people come in. You need to go where you are learning and improving and doing what you want to do. So there's a direct Calendly link to mock interview, resume workshop. If you want to have some career advice, it's direct to my schedule. You'll set up a Zoom, and we'll chat. Yes, go ahead.
I just want one question. Are you still teaching the 560 for SANS?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. Hi, I'm also a SANS instructor, and Jeff at Rogue Valley InfoSec. My marketing strategy is to not tell people I exist, which is not the most effective for penetration testing consulting, but I also do pen test consulting, so if you want to talk, there are lots of competitors here, but many of us are friends. Like, seriously, it's a little incestuous. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and I also teach for SANS for 560. With that,
I've taken it, and if anybody hasn't, you need to with him because it's one of the funnest classes. And so
it's mostly this level of energy for 6 days.
Yep.
And we all collapse afterwards. So thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful lunch. Cheers, everyone.